Okay, let's turn over to 2 Chronicles 22. 2 Chronicles 22. You know, y'all heard of these town criers, the people that used to stand out in the streets and I thought that's what you were applying for at LCU. Should have been the on the steps of the Moody Auditorium, ringing that bell.
She said she wouldn't even leave her head on her.
Right.
Just a tail bit.
All right. This lesson that we're going to talk about today. When I mention the name Athaliah, does anybody know that name? Athaliah. All right. And grandkid. Huh? 22. 2 Chronicles 22. Okay. A lot of people don't know. I'm glad there's some. Some people know who Athaliah is. And when you think of an evil woman in the Bible, who's the first person you think of? Jezebel. Well, this is Jezebel's daughter. And Athaliah was worse than Jezebel in some circles. Okay. So this is a tough lesson. Okay. A lot of times when you're learning about evil people like we are in this series, good lessons from bad guys, and this lady is a bad gal. We tend to, I don't know if it's negative or I don't know if it's me. You read the stories, but there's a lot of political and family turmoil and all these things that are just happening all the time. And man or human beings are trying to keep the peace when really God just wants us to follow Him. That's true peace. Well, this is a story of where man just messes up things. Okay. Well, and I could get into, there's a lot of, if you go back and start reading and you read slowly, try to digest the whole story, there's a lot of names that are flying around. So basically, I'm going to try and try to give you a summary, a little bit of a story, a summary up to where we are and the story about Athaliah. And also, it was tough for me when I'm in preparation as to how do we apply this to us today. Okay, we can't imagine ourselves being as, or maybe even being around anyone as evil as Athaliah was. I'm sure there are people back then, of course, and even now. But you think that that's kind of like in the story or on a newscast or somewhere not around us. But how do we apply that to us today? And so kind of think about that. Think about what we're doing there. Now, the Athaliah was in the line of that she married into the line of David and Solomon. There's David, Solomon, Rehoboam, Abiah, Asa, and Jehoshaphat, and so when we came down to Jehoram married Athaliah, and Athaliah was from the country or the lineage of Omri. So Judah is where David and Solomon and Rehoboam, Abiah came from, and Israel is from the Omri, Omri, the Omri. I guess I'm saying that right. Chain. And Omri was the father of Ahab, who married Jezebel, and then Jezebel, of course, had three children: Joram, Ahaziah, Ahaziah, and then there's Athaliah, huh? Yeah. And so there's the deal. Or this is the country or the lineage of Omri. When you go back, and when I went back, if we read just the Bible, which is a good idea to do, but you get this. What I thought was interesting is when I go look up about Athaliah and how she came from Omri. There's this part where the Jewish writers or the historians back then said that you don't hear much, or you hear negative things about Omri because all we read is the Bible, and they're very negative against Omri. They're very biblical, let's see, biased biblical authors is what they called it. And but if there is in the Bible, it is mentioned that there's these big cities and temples, great majestic buildings were built by Omri. And they give in the Bible, you look at that and they say David, Solomon, those people are the ones that built it up. So there's a little conflict there historically. Historically, there's a conflict. But that's not why we read the Bible, just say who built what. We're looking at the people that are God people, people that are following the Father. And so there's a conflict there in, I guess you might say, warring, conflicted nations among each other. So there's a part of the story that I think we can't ignore. We need to kind of look at that and see the setting, okay, about that. I don't know about you. When I was reading and studying about this, I was thinking that, and Omri, his line were following even though they were from Israel, they were following the pagan gods, and they were believed in multiple gods, polytheism, and so of course there's only one God, and Judah was following the one true God. Yeah, exactly. They didn't do what they're supposed to do, and so the marriage of Athaliah by Jehoram was, by human standards, was trying to keep the peace, or trying to, hey, we don't need to be warring with these people. Let's coexist peaceably. Well, as we found out when Moses, there's always this nations that you just don't allow evil in with God's people. You can't coexist. You got to stand apart. You got to put up your heels and say, no, I will not follow that. Okay. And so that may be something that we can apply to our lives today, or our current situation that we're in. But let's look at Athaliah here and see what she did. In Second Chronicles, if we go back a little ways in Second Chronicles 17:34, we can see that Jehoshaphat was a good and wise and faithful ruler. But as we progress on through the generations, we get more evil as we go down. And then if you look, we're supposed to be in 22, but if you back up into 21 just a little bit, there's a revolt against Judah. And what's interesting to me, in verse 16 of Second Chronicles 21, it says, the Lord stirred up against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and the Arabs who bordered the Ethiopians. And they came against Judah and invaded it and carried away. Now, who stirred them up? The Lord. Yeah, I thought that was interesting, Hey, Lord, you're supposed to be protecting us. But no, he stirred them up, and he, they were, they were not doing what they should have done. Okay. But if I want to skip on down as Jehoahaz, and I think there is another thing about it. Depending on who you read, the names change on us all once in a while. But in verse 20, we're talking about the king Jehoahaz, the youngest of his sons. After, if you look down in verse 20, he was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years, and he departed with no one's regret. And they buried him in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings. He died, and this guy died, and no one mourned, no one cared. He was that bad of a king. Okay, and then in verse 20, in chapter 22, then the inhabitants of Jerusalem made Ahaziah, and I apologize for butchering these names, Ahaziah, his youngest son, king in his place, for the band of men who came with the Arabs to the camp, had slain all the older sons. So Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, the king of Judah, became deranged. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Athaliah, the granddaughter of Omri. And he also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother was his counselor to do wickedly. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, like the house of Ahab, for they were his counselors after the death of his father, to his destruction. So here is this king, Ahaziah, who is following the counsel of Athaliah, who guided him in wicked ways. Okay? Guided him in wicked ways because, and that's just, have you ever seen anybody that was being guided in wicked ways? They just took the counsel of the wrong people. Okay, and we see it all the time. I guess we could all come up with certain examples of that. And so now, what's ironic about this is the name Athaliah. There's two meanings to Athaliah. The Lord is strong, or the Lord is exalted. And that's what's so ironic about it. So a name is a name, but she was nowhere close to being a woman of the Lord. And she proved to be even worse, or twice the evil that Jezebel was. But there's also where he was very, she was the type of woman that probably said wouldn't take no for an answer. You know, her evil and her influence was out, just reached out everywhere. And she influenced the king, they influenced her children, she influenced anybody and everybody around her. She was very dominating. And so anyway, so with all that, when she came down to where there was no one left, um, she influenced everyone down that. But let's go over to look at 22 verses 6 through 9. Let's go back to 5. He also, talking about the king, he also walked according to their counsel, and he went with Jehoram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, to wage war against Hazael, king of Aram, at Ramoth Gilead. But the Arameans wounded Joram, so he returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which they had inflicted on him at Ramah. And when he fought against Hazael, king of Aram, and Ahaziah, I can't say these words. Maybe just read. Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to see Jehoram, the son of Ahab, in Jezreel, because he was sick. And now the destruction of Ahaziah was from God, in that he went to Joram. For when he came, he went out with Jehoram against Jehu, the son of Nimshi, whom the Lord had appointed to cut off the house of Ahab. Did you get all that? Man, there's a lot of history, a lot of things going on there, a lot of J's, a lot of A's, a lot of things like that. But basically, it's just war after war after war going on and on. And but eventually, what it came down to is that Athaliah was going to be. She's in control. She was in control. She was influencing everyone for the evil. But it came down to where Athaliah was going to be the supreme leader on that. Now, there was, in my research, she was going to be considered a queen. Let's see. Became Queen Regnant, 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 Queen Regnant of the Kingdom of Judah, which means she was in total control, just almost like a king. Okay, she became that after she took the power. She influenced, but when her sons, and she just started killing off everybody. Her goal was to do away with the entire kingdom of Judah and bring in her influences from Israel, and bring the gods with her. Okay, and just bring in every type of evil. And God wasn't going to sit around for that. So, um, so let's go on down. And let's in verse 10 of chapter 22. Now, when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal offsprings of the house of Judah. And that means pretty much she was killing off grandkids. Okay, her own grandkids. But Jehoshabeth, the king's daughter, which is her daughter-in-law, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him from among the king's sons who were being put to death, and placed him and his nurse in the bedroom. Now the bedroom is in the temple, and Athaliah wouldn't go toward the temple. Now, she had her own temple for her own gods, but this God's temple, the temple that Solomon built, she wouldn't go near that. So hiding him in that place was probably the best place to do that. So this is the youngest son, Joash. Jehoshabeth took the king's daughter, took Joash and hid him for 6 years. And she was the sister of Ahaziah, and she hid him from Athaliah so that she would not put him to death, because she was going through and killing everybody so she could be in power. And she was power hungry. She was wanting to be. She saw that her influence, or one by one, was being killed off, and so to make sure that she stayed in power, she started killing off her enemies and people that would stand in her way. In verse 12 of chapter 22, and he was hidden with them in the house of God 6 years, while Athaliah reigned over the land. Now, another thing I question is, God can make things. What happened during those 6 years? We read it in one verse that she reigned in 6 years, and what a horrendous 6 years that could have been, or probably was. And my first thought was, why didn't people stand up earlier? Well, then I reached back that God has his plans, and thank God for Jehoshabeth that she did what she did, hid Joash for that long, and or we would have had a different end of the story. So let's look in verse 23. Up to this point, Athaliah had lost almost everything. Okay, and she was making sure that she was the only one being around there, and she was losing everything: her status, her influence, her position of importance. But she was making sure that she stayed in power. So let's look at chapter 23. Now, in the 7th year, Jehoiada strengthened himself and took captains of hundreds: Azariah the son of Jehoram, Ishmael the son of Johanan, Azariah the son of Obed, Messiah the son of Adiah, and Elisaphat the son of Zechari. And they entered into a covenant with him, and they went throughout Judah and gathered the Levites from all the cities of Judah and the heads of the fathers' households of Israel, and they came to Jerusalem. So here's the good guys. They're gathering forces to come and take back what is God's. Then all the assembly made a covenant with the king in the house of God, and Jehoiada said to them, "Behold, the king's son shall reign, as the Lord has spoken concerning the sons of David." When I started reading about this, about Athaliah, why would God allow this to happen? Well, here's some men that took a stand. I said, why did it take you 6 years? Well, sometimes we fall into things that we're not aware of before we turn around and say, how did we get here? That might have been what they were looking at too. She can't get worse than what she already is. And then they got surprised. Oh man, she's pretty bad. So at least they took a stand. Do what? Yeah. long before that. And in history, 6 years is a short period of time. You know, I think about what happened to me, or what, in your lifetime 6 years ago, and before you know it, man, I've been in my position that I'm in right now, where I'm at work. I look back, so I've been doing this, 6.5 years. And I just said, time flies, but a lot has happened, but then it's really short. So for them to come back, I was at first saying, like you said, she had influence, and it's tough to crack that influence, how she got there. But then here's some strong people that's about to stand up to her.
Having to hide and, try to keep themselves safe.
Yeah, and their families too. Yeah. Yeah. Then in verse 4, this is the thing which you shall do. 1/3 of you of the priests and Levites who come in on the Sabbath shall be gatekeepers, and 1/3 shall be at the king's house, and a third at the gate of the foundation, and all the people shall be in the courts of the house of the Lord. But let no one enter the house of the Lord except the priest and the ministering Levites. They may enter, for they are holy, and let all the people keep charge of the Lord. Now, when I'm also reading about this and going through there, she's bringing in her evil gods, her Baal, and all the pagan gods that she's bringing in, but the Lord's people are still existing. So they're kind of living together, but it's not really coexisting. If you get my drift on that, but it's still a presence, I guess you might say. Verse 7, and the Levites will surround the king, each man with his weapons in his hand, and whoever enters the house, let him be killed. Thus be with the king when he comes in and when he goes out. So they're protecting the king that's about to be crowned. So the Levites and all Judah did according to all that Jehoiada the priest commanded, and each one of them took his men who were to come in on the Sabbath with those who were to go out on the Sabbath, for Jehoiada the priest did not dismiss any of the divisions. Then Jehoiada the priest gave to the captains of hundreds the spears and the large and small shields which had been King David's, which were in the house of God. And he stationed all the people, each man with his weapon on his hand, from the right side of the house to the left side of the house, by the altar and by the house around the king. Then they brought out the king's son and put the crown on him and gave him the testimony and made him king. And Jehoiada and his sons anointed him and said, long live the king. Now I read through that in pretty methodically. Because when I read through it, I thought it was kind of cool. I mean, I read through it more than once, 2 or 3, but the more I read about it, the more I was encouraged about all the preparation that they went through. They planned it. They put together. They came together. It wasn't just one person doing it. The one person might have got them started, and he was the natural leader, but he brought everybody together. And a good leader is the one that will bring them like a natural, bring them together for the good. And you convince them this is the way it ought to go. And so right there, then in verse 11, he says, long live the king. They brought the king out, the true king, and said and presented him. When Athaliah, verse 12, yes, that's very important. That's right. Thank you for that. And when Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and praising the king, she came into the house of the Lord to the people. And she looked, and behold, the king was standing by his pillar at the entrance, and the captains and the trumpeters were beside the king. How old was the king? 6 or 7. Was he 7? Young kid. Okay. And she looked, and behold, the king was standing by the pillar, and the trumpeters were beside the king, and all the people of the land rejoiced and blew trumpets, and the singers with their musical instruments leading the praise. Then Athaliah tore her clothes and said, treason, treason. Okay, this is treason. Actually, she was the one that was causing the treason. She's the one that came in and brought it in, but she's treason. She hollered treason. And Jehoiada, the priest, brought out the captains of hundreds who were appointed over the army and said to them, bring her out between the ranks, and whoever follows her put to death with the sword. For the priest said, let let her not be put to death in the house of the Lord. So they seized her, and when she arrived at the entrance of the holy horse gate of the king's house, they put her to death there. So they assassinated her. And that was the end of her reign. Okay? She reigned by herself for 6 years, and the only reason she did 6 years was because the true king was being hidden for all that time and being protected. So here's some brave men that brought her out. And so this is not only a story of evil from that evil woman, but her, and kind of like we got a few minutes, but how do we apply this today? Here's a good end of a bad gal, and here's the story of some of people that rose up, for the Lord. And as Vicky brought out, Wendy brought out that we have, the word of the Lord is before us. So how do we apply this today? How can we apply this? Because evil's all around us, but Athaliah was power hungry, and her. It's almost like I've heard this a lot lately. Let's coexist. Let's cooperate. Let's all unify. And it really seems like we're unified as long as you go along with what I say. You know, and so that's what she was on. Why was she so power hungry? A lot of people are motivated by money. Some are motivated by power, and that evidently that's what she had, and she couldn't get enough. There's people that they have money, they want more, and they get success, and they want more success. And so the same thing with power. They get some power, they just want more and more. Is it because of or they fear that what would be like, their life would be like without it, or what? Is it just an evil? Is it just an evil trait? Yeah.
But we do see examples of history. Children, and the excuses that there's from love for the child. That's supposed to help. Of course, where we may not be able to take that motivation, that's why. For power themselves. You see it all the time with parents doing things for their children. And it's excused away as love, but still. Well,
Yeah. It, right.
Well, and that's all we need to, I think this whole message is about standing up for what's right. And if a group
Exactly.
of people who are towards people vote against things, stand up, and whatever we need to do, then we're doing what God wants.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like those ones, whatever that vote is about, sanctuary city, and abortion, all those kinds of things. Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And his wife is the one who sold what was
Joash.
David's son. David's son was just about wiped out by her.
Right.
If it hadn't been for saving his child. And they hit him.
I thought of Moses at the same time.
It's always, even though you think I said there are God's people.
Right.
God makes a thing there because we as God's people are. I mean,
Right.
if we follow the nation, it's God's people's fault.
Yeah.
But we have to.
And can you imagine those people going in and seeing that kid that was 6 or 7, and they're all in. They're like,
Yeah.
They're cheering and hollering, and
Well, they're cheering not him as much as the plan, the lineage. Exactly.
this is so much better. We're going to be.
Yeah.
I believe some of the
Yes.
Because I think after this, there's a drive to raise funds to repair the temple.
Yeah.
So I guess you may have destroyed part of the temple.
Yeah. To give this story the credit, one class is not enough, but there's a lot of build up at this point. And of course, the last 6 years has been the what proved to be, hey, let's save the David, the line of David, at what it might have been, we got to do this right now, has grown into this. Yes, he promised that, exactly. And so we need to do things right now that we think are right, and we may not see the result of that till 6 years later. Well, yeah, okay. So you got to do what you got to do now. But anyway, power hungry people, I must say that a lot of times when I've seen it, I might have been guilty of it too. It's always nice to have a little bit of pat on the back, when you do a good job. And then I heard one guy say one time in a speech that you've heard that phrase. If you want to do it right, you got to do it yourself. He said, that's not really true. He says, you're just wanting it done your way. And so we got a little of that in all of us. Okay. We got to be careful about that. Hopefully not to her point. But I think what we want to do is not, the reason this was kind of tough in one respect is we see the evil that Athaliah brought and what she brought, and of course her demise. But to be honest with ourselves, how many of us get a little, a power can be addictive. It can, because you get that little pat on the back by your people around you. You get a little pump. Your ego gets a little pumped up a lot, and then you kind of and you see your kids or your grandkids do well. You go, you're excited. You're excited about that, and to the point where I've seen my I had 2 daughters that were in softball, and you see some parents go to the nth degree to make sure their kid was in the limelight, and they would even go down and cheat. Okay, and with birth certificates and things, it was awful to see things like that. I personally didn't see it, but I always heard stories about it. And, they said this guy used to be here, but he's not because of what he did. So anyway, it's something that kind of seeps into our lives, and if we're not aware of it, and we always need to put God first, God focus, Him and Him only. So if you ambition, and that's what we can kind of look at the ambition. Ambition is not, it's not a bad thing unless you put the word selfish in front of it. And Paul talks about that in Philippians 2, verse 3, and also James talks about it in James 3, verse 14, talking about selfish. Huh? Yeah. Colossians 3:23, exactly. Yeah, it glorifies God, exactly. And you're exactly right. But ambition is okay unless you put that word selfish in front of it. And that's what Paul talks against, and James talks against as well. Be ambitious for God. Right. Okay, great discussion. Exactly. Good point.
They were doing good. But then as the reign went on, certainly where they fell away.
Yeah. And it might have been the lack of self.
Did well until Jehoiada. After that, I think
He started going down.
Well, and how sad, I hope it's never said of the president. He died to no regret.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
That's true.
There were some of them that were trying to do good, except, you know, except they let lots of them, or except they let them have, like, you know, like, but compared to the evil on the other one, it's like, so did they accept?
I don't know.
You did great, except, you didn't do well, I don't know.
Yeah. I've read some just recently. I didn't intend to bring this up, but I will. Read something about it was in the political arena, but said it's easy to be a member of a certain party because everything's okay, everything's all right, and to stand firm and to stand for what's right takes a little courage, and sometimes courage is and so these evil people that come in and influence you, if you just back off and don't do anything and don't say anything, then that's easy. But what takes courage is to stand up. Do what? Yeah.
I know I'm yapping a little bit, but seriously, I mean, there are people that I talk to that I know the Holy Spirit is speaking. Otherwise, I would be, because I'm not smart.
Well, and it's a slippery slope, and if you allow one thing, or you think, oh, well, maybe that's all right. You know, that's kind of how it starts.
It does.
It's just, you know, accepting things because everything's being crammed on our throat. We need to accept this, we need to accept this, we need to accept this.
I know we keep going, but I remember this one time. My mother was a very, very stern teacher and very disciplined, very, very unmovable, if you know what I mean, to the point to where she would call mean a lot of times, you know. And one time I was rebuking my daughter, scolding her for something, and she goes, "Man, you sounded just like Mamaw." And I stopped and kind of go, "Oh, I don't want to do that." And then I just thought, "So wait a minute." And I turned around to her and said, "And she was right. Do what I tell you." All right, thanks, guys.